Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Welcome back to College Knowledge. I'm Dave, the CEO, alongside
Mr. Joe, the college pro, also known as Joe Kearns.
And we are very honored today to have a huge resource in the college admissions industry on the show. Jeff Selingo has agreed to join us. He's the author of the book Dream School and several others, but I'll let him tell about himself. Jeff, welcome to the show.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are well published in the college admissions world. Can you give us a little background, how you got here, how you became but famous for this?
Well, I guess it really starts back all the way in the summer of 1994 when I was a summer intern at U.S. News and World Report, and I worked on the great colleges, the College Guide, America's Best Colleges. And so I worked on the rankings way back in 1994 and got a little flavor for the madness around college admissions. And then fast forward 3 years later, when I started as a reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and for 16 years, I worked in a variety of roles at the Chronicle, including the top editor, covering this industry, this huge industry of higher education. And so I was always fascinated working on the inside of the industry by how people perceived it on the outside, meaning the consumers, parents and students and counselors, because they really didn't know in many ways how it worked, especially parents who went to school 20, 25, 30 years ago, and now their own kids are going to school, and maybe they have 1, 2, or 3 kids, so they're only going to enter this process a couple times in their life. It's not like buying a car where you might have to buy a car every couple of years and you might own multiple cars. Your kid's going to college, hopefully just once, and you're kind of dipping into it when they're a sophomore in high school, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by the amount of information out there and just how much it's changed since you went to school.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You've written several books on the subject matter. Obviously, you've edited countless periodicals and articles and research on the subject. We always say in our world, and I hate to use the expression that it's a game, but there are rules and there are things you have to do. There are timetables. And if you understand how to play it, you can fare better. Would you agree with that statement?
I think you definitely need to approach it with more knowledge. And this is the message I tell parents all the time. I think we approach college as, this experienced good. You really know the value of it after you buy it. Like we all either love our college experience or hated it or somewhere in between. But I think parents particularly have this emotional tie to college. They still maybe root for the sports teams. They still wear their sweatshirts. They still have their college friends. Maybe they met their spouses at college. So there's this huge emotional tie to college. And so when their kids are going through the process, they think the same thing and they don't approach it kind of as a bottom line business thing. You're buying a house, you're buying a car, you're doing whatever. And so they don't approach it by knowing as much information as they need to know. And then approaching it kind of in a, just like you're not going to get snowed over by the car salesperson, you really want to approach this having all the information you need. Is it a game? Yes. I don't think colleges and universities are out to get you necessarily, but it's definitely, I think it's definitely something you need to have. The more information you're armed with, the more you tie this to what do you really need out of this process rather than the emotion of it, the better off you're going to be at the end of the day.
I like the term you used, industry, right? Like we always say colleges are businesses. Some of them can be very profitable nonprofits, but it's a business. And I like the term that you were saying, like this is an industry and you got to know what is important to the schools. You got to know what's important. Do they have the students' interest in mind? Are they just trying to stay afloat? Or is their focus going to be more on not closing, or are they still having focus on the students? I like that term. I don't think I've ever actually used it that way. It's like, it's this whole industry.
And we've always said, don't fall in love with a school until a school falls in love with you. Right? Yeah. That's sort of our take on that. We're in the Philadelphia area, and Penn State's a huge, huge school around here. Everybody wants to go to Penn State, right? And so we're like, hey, just pause. Let's figure out what else is out there and what you can do. Understand. And I think your point is the research is what matters in all of this. Now, you were the curator of some of that research back in the day, as you said, when you started, right? Was it a staggering thing to get into, to start doing that research and studying what I guess I would call the business end of college?
So it's interesting that we know much more about higher education than I knew when I went off to college in 1991. So I graduated high school in 1991, went off to Ithaca College, and I'm amazed now looking back. In fact, I have a chapter in the new book, Dream School, about how much information we have at our fingertips today compared to when many of today's parents went to college maybe in the 1990s or a little bit later. For example, the basic idea of graduation rates, knowing how many students graduate, what percentage of students in a cohort graduate from a college, we did not know until 2000. That bill was passed in as I trace back in Dream School in 1994. There's all this information that we know that's now required by colleges to disclose to the federal government. Then they put it up on websites like the College Scorecard or College Navigator. And then, by the way, magazines, guidebooks, everybody else uses that information in their feeds. So we could compare and contrast colleges based on how many students stay, how many students graduate, what are the most popular majors, how much money they're going to make. All this information that now is traded in online communities about what is the better college, or how US News even now puts together the rankings based on all this information, is much different today than it was then. So this to me is information that I've gotten to know over the years, and I help parents understand, because it could be really overwhelming. There was a person that I interviewed, a mother I interviewed for the book, who had this incredible spreadsheet. You would have been super impressed with it. She had like multiple rows and multiple columns of like every data point on a college. And she told me this story. She said, I would show this to friends and they would like kind of look at me funny, like, wait a second, you're doing that much research on college? But it's true. I mean, so my hope is that I don't want to overwhelm parents. I want to try to be that explainer in chief. I want to be that translator to tell them, here's what matters most.
So you wrote an article that had a massive influence in my career, that you did an interview at Lafayette University. And there was a statement in that article that said, and I'll probably botch the quote, but I'll get it close enough. It was, for a lot of the admissions process, they lead with idealism. And then at some point, they have to look at the bottom line and they have to be strategic about who gets in, who can afford and who cannot afford. Because while the FAFSA, the CSS profile, the way they manage money at schools, at some point they have to answer to a bottom line, right? There has to be a solvent freshman class, I think is the way you put it. Can you extrapolate on that concept a little bit so the listeners can understand how prevalent that is in the business end of college?
So at the end of the day, a college admissions office is a business. It's the revenue generator for most colleges and universities. Very few colleges and universities can run without tuition revenue. Some of the big institutions with 40, $50 billion in revenue or endowment can do it, but that's about it. So what Lafayette does, like some schools, not a lot of schools, because they tend to be, most schools are need blind in admissions, meaning they don't take your need into account, but then they also can't give you enough money to actually enroll there. And so they end up gapping you, and that requires you to go out and find loans or not go there at all. It's essentially what many in the industry call admit deny. You're essentially admitting them, but you're in essence denying them because they can't afford to go there. Lafayette, along with some other colleges, practice need-aware admissions, meaning that at some point in the admissions process, they do take a student's admissions or financial background into account, because they think that if we're going to admit the student, we have to have enough money to actually provide them in financial aid to come here. And so as a result, during the process, at some point, sometimes they want a student, but they know what? We don't have enough money in our financial aid budget to really support the student. So we're going to deny them rather than admit them and they have to figure out how to come up with the money. And so that is really the change in the idealism. I actually like that. I like that way of thinking. I think it's actually better than admitting them and then letting them figure out on their own how to pay for it. Because I think what ends up happening is, for some students, they can make it work. But for many students, they go deeper into debt than they really need to because it is their dream school. It's the place they really want to go. And I think they make some bad financial decisions as a result.
Yeah, we talk about the financial literacy at that point in life. And when you're talking about the idea of the dream school, as parents, we work very hard to get our kids to all the events, to do all the stuff, encourage them to study and work hard. And then they get into that school and that sort of admit, deny. That's the first time I've heard it put that way, which is a really good, bad. I don't know. It just is. It is what it is. But it's why the debt problem persists, right? Because parents don't want to say no. Their kids have worked hard. This is the dream school. And now they're in that situation where they've got to make a really tough decision. And sometimes we all make a poor choice when it comes to tough decisions about the future of your child, right?
I think so. I always encourage parents to think not only about the academic and social fit of their child, but that financial fit. And I think what ends up happening because of the way college finances work, it's a black box for most families. They say to their kids, yeah, apply anywhere you want and we'll figure out how to pay for it later on, rather than up front to start to think, okay, how much money do we really have? What's our budget? What's possible? Using things like the net price calculator to try to figure out how much approximately might this thing cost us. And again, going back to that mother I was telling you earlier about the spreadsheet, she had what the net price calculator spit back out to her early on, and then what the final financial aid offer was. And for the most part, they were within a couple of thousand of what she had. I wish it were closer. In many cases, it should be almost exact. But she at least knew, well, this is in the realm of possibility. And her and her kids had serious discussions about some schools were no longer in the realm of possibility anymore because financially they didn't work. And I think many families don't have that conversation early enough. I think they have it much later in the process, sometimes after the student's been accepted. And that's when you see a lot of disappointment.
Yeah. I always try to guide the families I work with to say, have that conversation. I don't want somebody to not apply to a school that may be a great social and academic fit because they assume the financial fit won't be there, but you don't know what the school's truly going to cost until you get that award, maybe do an appeal, and then see what the response is. So if you have the conversation early on to say, you can apply, but if the price comes in over this, we agree that it's as if you didn't get in, right? Like it becomes off the table. It's not feasible. It's not in the budget, but I don't want you to say, no, you can't apply. And then that dream school becomes in the affordable category and you didn't do it because you thought it was going to be too expensive. So I think that conversation has to happen. You have to talk money with the kids. College is too expensive. And as we said, there can be some really bad decisions. So have the conversation about it, I think is huge impact for families moving forward.
Critically important to make sure that early on you talk about money, because most parents don't talk about money with their kids. And I think having that conversation early on perhaps helps lessen the disappointment later on.
There was a study done, and I can't cite the source, but it was about the biggest concern that kids have in their adolescent years is what they cause financially to their parents. And that concern that as they're looking at college, they're concerned about that money piece. And I think that just goes to the point where if you have the conversation, you give the child the parameters, they'll play within the parameters. The biggest number that I focus on as I plan for families on the financial side to do this is, where is the no number? At what number do you guys agree that it is a no, right? And I'll sit with families for 45 minutes and have this singular conversation. And they'll say, well, 30,000. And I'll say, so if it's 32.5, and they'll go, well, no, we would make that work. And I say, well, we have to define where you won't make it work, where you won't try. And so I think that's a great point that everybody here is agreeing on is figure out that number where it's a no-go. Right? Because if you have that, then you can take this on. Are there strategies, Jeff, that you think the common family just doesn't know about when it comes to applying to schools? Is there a sweet spot for number of schools you should apply to? We talk about competitive intelligence in our business a lot. Make sure you're applying to competitors. You have to understand who the competitors are. Give us some insight there if you have it, please.
I'm still surprised at how many families don't understand merit aid and how to play that game and who gets in and why. My last book, I had this discussion about the buyers and sellers list. Many schools are sellers, meaning they don't really need to give financial aid to fill seats because they're overwhelmed with applications. That's probably about 40 or 50 schools at the very top of the rankings. The vast majority of schools are buyers, meaning they have to offer discount coupons, even to students who don't have financial need necessarily in order to fill seats. And parents really have a hard time understanding that concept. Well, what do you mean I'm going to get aid from somebody, even if they don't think I need it necessarily. I said, well, it's just like Macy's giving you a $10 off coupon or 10% off coupon to get you in the door, because they know when you're in the store, you're going to buy 10 other things than the thing you went in there for. Same thing for colleges. They would rather get some money from you, 30,000 or 40,000, and then have to give you that discount, because otherwise they're going to be left with an empty seat in a classroom or an empty bed. And that concept, once they understand it, opens up an entire conversation about, well, what schools are more generous with merit aid? And then we talk about these buyers on my list. And that really blows them away in a way, because to them, financial aid means financial need. And they feel like, well, I don't qualify for it, right? In many cases, they might not, depending on and increasingly, though, they are qualifying for it because college is so expensive. Even if they think they don't really understand that there's all these schools out there where they might be the right student that school needs, and thus they're going to throw a decent amount of money from them. And when they understand that, it really, to me, changes the college equation.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, for the past couple of years, I think I came up with the Coles Cash scholarships is what I've called them. You said Macy's. I was like, all right, I'm on
another
the right
discounter.
Yeah. And what I explained to parents is, and I think it becomes that emotion. I said, colleges know what they're doing. Like, I know that there are schools in our area that 100% of the kids that apply are getting a $30,000 discount. It's amazing how the price goes up $2,000 and the scholarship goes up $2,000 every year. It's insane. But what I tell them is, okay, if you get a $35,000 scholarship from that school, it's a $5,000, right? Like, it's not really if everybody's getting it, they're not saying that you're unique, right? And parents and students, I think, don't feel that it's, I don't want to say right, but they get that feeling that, like, this school wants me. They acknowledge my achievements, my hard work. They're giving me $120,000 over 4 years. But if they give it to everybody, are they really acknowledging that? And I think some parents lose that. So the merit-based side, that's the big thing that I've learned, that schools give need, no merit. Other schools give a ton of merit and not necessarily need, or they might mix the two. They give you the scholarship, but they classify it as some of its need. And knowing how schools give their money out, again, ends up leading to, is it potentially going to be a financial fit or not? Don't just look at that cost of attendance. Oh, it's $85,000. We're taking it off the list. Well, if they give everybody merit, it could become affordable. And that's where I think we kind of say it's a game. It's understanding the industry.
To Jeff's point, getting parents over that hump is wild. I have had people argue with me on that subject. Like, that's not how it works, that you're wrong. How many awards do you want me to pull out of the file to show you that every single person that went to, I can think of a couple off top. I won't throw any schools under the bus right now, but I feel like getting them over that hump is a big deal. It's not always simple.
Well, and the reason they have to get over that hump is because especially if you care about prestige and rankings, it's a delicate balance, because the further up the chain, the pecking order, the ladder you go up the rankings or prestige, the less merit aid they give out. Because again, they're the sellers. They don't need to give this out. So it is like, well, where do I want to fall on that spectrum so that I get just enough prestige and just enough money? It's kind of, especially for those parents who care about both. If you don't care about money, then you could just go for, be full pay at some prestigious school. But if you care about money and you care about prestige, those are the parents that this really blows them away, because they start to think, oh, I could actually try to achieve both if I play this game right.
Correct. Agreed.
So talking about rankings and prestige, is that what everybody looks for in a dream school, or should they not be looking for
no,
that?
not at all.
We have a couple sayings, and I know we definitely want to get into the topic of finding that right dream school for you.
And that really is the book, right? The book is a little bit of a play on the term dream school, right? Because when people think, oh, it's my dream school, it's like, oh, it's like one single school. It's like the place I want to go. To me, as I say in the book, dream school is not about a single school. It's not about even a type of school. Like, I want to go to an Ivy League. That's my dream. Dream school is about where you're going to find your people, where you're going to get the best professors who are going to be your mentors, where you're going to find how you thrive and where you thrive, right? It's the fit that is the dream that you're trying to get here. And the purpose of this book is to give parents, especially, because I think parents drive this process around prestige more than the students do. I think parents care about that bumper sticker or that window sticker on their car more than students do. The goal here is to really help them understand and give them permission to think more broadly. Like it's okay, parent, to think more broadly about the schools that your child is applying to, and then give them the tools to find the right fit so that when they go to those PTA meetings, when they go to those cocktail parties, when they see friends at the supermarket and they tell them where their child is going, they're really proud of that rather than sometimes what I see as parents like under their breath, yeah, they're going to, and then they like mumble the name of the school in some way. So my hope with this book is that people are loud and proud about where they end up.
Yeah, I call it the trifecta of fit, and you've already said it, but it's best academic, social, and financial fit. And when you find that sweet spot, the student thrives, the parents don't take on debt for the student doesn't take on excess debt, and you have a person whose launch is successful, right? That's what we're really all going for, is what's after the college is what everybody's focused on. I do get perturbed at the bumper sticker conversation, right? That's a tough one because we know today that kids put more pressure on themselves than ever before academically, right? And then you add that bumper sticker pressure, which is disappointing the parents. That's just that's a heavy burden to carry at that point, especially given all the subject matter that we've just spoken about, right? The competition that's out there, the buyers, the sellers, the actual cost of it, the debt burdens on it. And then you throw that on top of a 17 or 18-year-old who doesn't have the mental maturity necessary to take on all of that and understand it.
Yeah. I want to have a bumper sticker. My kid's going to college, graduating debt free. That's the bumper sticker I want parents to have, right?
I mentioned in Dream School, I wish that we just had, this is probably going to date me, but like what Jim Belushi wore in Animal House, it's just
college,
just we're going to college. That's what counts.
And it's funny too, because I have met wildly successful people at schools that I'd never heard of. They graduated from schools wildly successful people that didn't even go. And then I've met some duds that have gone to some really, really expensive high-end Ivies and otherwise. One thing I want to circle back on that is a fantastic point, and we usually ask it at some point in the show, but you got to it early, which was the mentorship. We have talked to, I don't know, 150, 160 guests that are professors or deans or provosts at schools all over the country. And the sort of reoccurring theme for all of it is the mentorship. Their side of mentorship, they feel the best about themselves when they're able to mentor students, and all of their success is because of some other mentor. And so talk a little bit about mentorship in higher education.
So I think it's really critical that students, we know from studies that students who find somebody who kind of cares about them as an adult especially within that first semester of college, they find their sense of purpose, they find their sense of belonging, that person usually helps them with. Now, that mentor could be often not exclusively a professor, because you're going to spend most of your time with professors. It could be a coach if you're an athlete. It could be an advisor, especially if you're in a club. It could be some sort of adult in the institution. And the question that you should be asking when you're looking for colleges is, how often does that happen? So ask other undergraduates. How easy is it to happen here at this institution? So are professors, for example, accessible in terms of their office hours before class? Like one thing that I notice when I sit in classes, does the professor come early, talk to students? Does the professor stay late afterwards? How does the professor walk out of the class by him or herself? Or are they surrounded by a gaggle of students wanting to talk to them? Do they go back to their office, continue those conversations, or are they always in a hurry? Or are they really not interested in undergraduates? I mean, that to me is key. You want to go to a place that actually cares about you as an undergraduate. There's the lead story in the book in Dream School is of a student who ends up in an Ivy League school, his dream school, and wants to do undergraduate research, which, by the way, is highly correlated with having a mentor. And his advisor essentially laughs at him because he says, well, at this place, we don't really care about undergraduates, right? All the research is done by graduate students. And the student who got into this place says to me, it was like one of those things that they didn't focus on during the search, because during the search, they were so enamored by the type of school, right? The ranking of the school.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
I tell a story often about, I went to Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was a great school, giant pain in my backside to get in and out. But my senior year, I had a economic game theory class. There were 6 of us. we had class at my professor's house while his wife cooked us dinner. And we sat around and talked and we hung out and we were talking economic game theory, but it's just a whole different level when you have that type of community.
It's interesting that you bring that up. There's a book about college, like how to do college, written by a sociologist, formerly of Hamilton College. And one of the things he says in this big survey that he did of students was that getting invited to dinner by a professor is like a moment in your undergraduate career, or to a group dinner by a professor is a moment in your undergraduate career where you start to feel like an adult. Now, at small colleges like F&M or where I went at Ithaca, that was pretty common, right? I remember, I think also times are different now. That doesn't happen as often. Maybe they go out to a restaurant instead or something like that. But multiple times we did like the final class was at the professor's house, or we went over to watch a presidential debate in a politics class at a professor's house because the classes were so small you could do that. And having that interaction in a small group setting, not only with your peers but with the adult in the room, was transformative for somebody like me going to college. And to me, that's an experience that not only gave me these mentors that I had in college, but also helped me understand how to communicate with adults and how to just even have dinner with adults, right? There's all these like little things that you learn in college that are kind of in the hidden curriculum, as we sometimes call it, that is not called out in a course catalog or in a syllabus or something like that.
Oh man, I'm just soaking all this in, Jeff. This is wonderful. The one thing I did want to ask is we have mentioned like prestige and rankings a few times today. I know how Dave feels. I know how I feel about it. I'm not one of the rankings are what makes a school great, just like the example story you mentioned. But I also know that there are schools, especially with where higher education is headed, that there may be some red flags that you want to be aware of. Like we've heard horror stories. I have some families, unfortunately, that were at Cabrini College. Closes. They're a junior. Figure it out. You can't graduate from here anymore. How much do rankings incorporate like the financial stability of a school that, hey, if I'm going to look at rankings, I don't need the prestige, but I also need to make sure that there's some security in that this program that I'm going into isn't going to be dropped, that the school's not going to close. Like if I go here, I'm going to be able to finish. I think has to be part of building that list to find that dream school. Do you get into any of that at all in the book? I was just curious if is a take that you have on that side of things as well.
Yeah, so the rankings for the most part don't look at financial sustainability. I do in the book, as I do in naming the 75 new dream schools that I talk about at the end of the book. But I do have a chapter on financial sustainability and what are the things you should look at. I'm actually less worried about the Cabrini example you gave. There will be some colleges that go out of business and more than usual, but not a ton.
Okay.
I think really what I would worry about, I would worry less about that and more about, does this college have the resources to invest in me as a student? Because what I think is going to more likely happen is that colleges just have to cut back. They have to trim expenses. They're going to try to do things essentially on the cheap, including student affairs and academic affairs and things like that. And you want to make sure, are they cutting, not in a bad way, but are they cutting corners essentially on the educational product that they sold me in order to save money? And that to me is when you're looking at the financial sustainability of a college, that's really what you're looking for. Do they have the revenue to invest in all the promises that they have made to me?
I've watched the chemical industry in the 80s go through mergers and acquisitions and consolidations and then sell-offs of pieces. And so like, let's say you had 100 companies, it went down to 20 companies, and then it grew back up to 80 companies because they sold off pieces. I've watched the college world. Do you see consolidation? Do you see mergers? Is that a thing that would happen in higher education?
It's very hard to merge colleges. On our podcast, Future You, we've done like 3 episodes on this. And I'm just shocked at how this differs from every other industry where it's a lot easier to merge colleges. Some of this is just geography. You mentioned Cabrini, which was taken over by Villanova. That was largely a land deal, right? Villanova needs the land. They're less interested in the institution. There's not a lot of colleges that are strong players like a Villanova next to weak players like a Cabrini. So that will happen, but not very much. And it's only going to happen in those big metro areas where they're next to each other. So then you have this issue like, okay, well, maybe you have a college that they're not near each other, but one has a strong program in X and the other doesn't. And I'm willing to take the college over for that. But then you have geography, right? So that happened. Northeastern took over Mills College in Oakland, right? So Northeastern in Boston, Mills in Oakland, and that's now like the California campus for Northeastern. Another great example, but again, there's only so many that are going to be able to do that. I see mergers and acquisitions being a strategy, but it's not going to be that big of a strategy. It's definitely not going to solve the problems at a big level for higher ed.
With declining populations and less people going to college now than ever, historically speaking, these colleges are going to have to fight harder for students. At least maybe not that top level tier you talk about, maybe not the ones that, but the buyers are going to have to, they're going to have to buy harder. They're going to have to work harder at it. How do you see that affecting the future financial game or the future financial outlook on college?
Well, I think it's going to really hurt college's bottom line, but I think it might help the parents and students' bottom line. There's going to be a lot more competition for students in the next couple of years. I just recently wrote a story for New York Magazine about Syracuse, which I know Ron Lieber also wrote for the New York Times. In May of 2025, after May 1st, after people had put down their deposits elsewhere, they were going back to students who applied to Syracuse and were accepted, but had not said whether they were going to come or not, or in some cases even said they were not coming, had already committed elsewhere, and started offering them $10,000, $20,000 to switch, essentially. Yeah. Some did, many didn't. But I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Clearly, Syracuse missed their yield and so had to try to find students to fill seats. And I think that's just going to happen. I don't think it'll necessarily happen after May 1. I think you're going to start to see this earlier on in the year where they're just throwing those discounts at students to try to get them to enroll.
We've helped families with financial aid forms for 20 years now. We've been through that. And when COVID happened, we had a whole issue. And then when the COVID relief bill changed how the FAFSA was done, the delays and the issues and all that, the colleges still haven't sorted it all out and gotten back to a normalcy in giving. I saw a better giving year this year than we've seen in 3 years, upfront giving, trying to get that yield number back up. And I suspect that a savvy school out there is going to start to prop people earlier. They're going to start to try and get those commits early. We talk about the metrics and the algorithms that schools use and the way they look at demonstrated interest is a real thing at a lot of schools that has come back in vogue because they can demonstrate interest through electronic connection now. They can measure the open emails. They can measure the same stuff businesses do. So I have a feeling schools are going to start to, okay, there's a high probability of them coming if admitted, and if we give them X dollars and start to dial it in even better. And I think artificial intelligence is only going to help that subject. Thoughts on that, Jeff?
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, artificial intelligence, I think, is going to enter into the financial aid and the admissions game a little bit in terms of trying to figure out, is this student going to be retained and graduate? Because that's another issue. Most schools want to know if they're going to admit a student, are they going to drop out after a year and we're going to have to make that up some way? Yeah. So they really want to know who's going to be retained. So I think it's going to enter there. And I think giving out financial aid is such a complicated puzzle. It's fascinating to me, right? Every year, colleges put out all these financial aid packages. They really don't know who's going to take them and who's not, but they really have to make their budget. They want to put enough money out on the street for students to take it, but if they put too much out there and too many students take it, then they've suddenly blown their financial aid budget. That to me is a fascinating algorithm because, as you mentioned, life hasn't been normal since 2020. No. Something has always disrupted that process, and they're basing all of their data on the past. That's where, again, AI, I think, could really help with the behavior piece of it and how are people going to react to $10,000 in financial aid versus $12,000 in financial aid.
The one thing that just went through my mind, because I've told families the idea, like, you find out you've been accepted, you wait for those awards, that you don't want to jump the commitment letter and deposit too early. And the story you just told about Syracuse and potentially in the future of them making that offer sooner, if you did something like an early action, you find out you're accepted and you said yes right away, I don't think Syracuse is going to all of a sudden just say, oh, thanks for accepting. Here's that extra $10,000, right? Like, you got to know, if you commit too early, there might be some money you're leaving on the table, especially if you're going to have some competitor offers that you might be able to use as leverage against that school. So with this future, I think pump the brakes. You might say, that's the dream school, I wanted to go there. But also nobody wants to overpay for something. So you have until May 1st to make that commitment. Make sure that offer's right before. That's what I got from that story that you were telling. And with Dave, when you started, I was like, all right, everybody might know you're going, but officially see what that offer could be first. I don't know. Is that,
and I think, oh no, you're not wrong on that, because what I heard after I wrote that story on Syracuse for New York Magazine, I heard from all these parents who had committed, their kids had committed back in March, and they didn't get very much money from Syracuse. They felt like a fool, right? They were not happy. Now, here's what I think schools are going to do to try to get you to commit earlier. Then they're going to start, and some schools already do this. Hey, we're going to give you priority for the best dorms. We're going to give you first in line for classes. We're going to give you this. They're going to sweeten the pot to get you to commit earlier, because that's exactly what Ron Lieber suggested in his column about Syracuse. Hey, let's wait. Just wait. Well, schools don't want you to wait, right? They want to commit early, right? They want you to commit early. And so trust me, they are going to try to figure out a way to get people to commit earlier.
That's a fascinating future development too. How do you set the hook? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the bait's there, the financial bait's there, the prestige is there. Now, how do you convert? I think about like the signing bonus is real. There are signing bonuses exist in college. So I'm listening. They will offer you a $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 single year award to sign early. Yeah. Can the colleges pull off a time limit offer?
That's a good question. Like, you already have a early decision, obviously, but they can say, well, you accept it and we're going to give you this award, but you have to decide by March 1st. There's really nothing stopping them from changing the calendar, especially with NACAC changing its guidelines a couple of years ago. It's kind of the Wild West right now. So I think colleges have been kind of kind to each other. They've competed in a way, kind of in a friendly way, but
everybody plays nice in the sandbox when everything's hunky-dory, right? When competition starts getting in there and you're threatened with a bottom line or a close down or a cutback, you're going to change a little bit.
September 9th, is that when the
September 9th, Dream School, how to find a college that's right for you.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's 75 schools.
Yep, 75 schools listed in the back in the appendix. Okay. The book is not, don't think of it as a rankings. Don't think of it as a guidebook. Don't think of it as, colleges that change lives. It does name names. But the bulk of the book is how admissions has changed, especially even in the last 5 years since my last book. Why we need to think more broadly about higher education, so we're not just talking about the same 25 or 50 schools. And then what are you looking for? What are you looking for in a good school?
Love it. Were there any schools that surprised you, like with the metrics that you used that made the list that you weren't expecting to? You don't have to name all 75, but was there one or two that really like, oh.
Well, here's one that not too far from me and not too far from you, Dickinson. Dave went to F&M, he said, so kind of a competitor to F&M. So we used a number of different data. We did a huge data screen over a couple of years using 6 or 7 different data sources to come up with this list. And one of them was a price and earnings ratio. So how much are you paying for how much you're getting in return? And one of the things that Dickinson really popped for me was on their earnings. Their graduates out-earn a lot of people with similar degrees from similar institutions. And because they're pretty generous with merit aid, their price is lower as a result. So your price is lower on one end, your earnings are doing well. And why is that? Think about location. Not far from the state capital, not far from a lot of like Army and military bases, not far from Washington, D.C. So a lot of those students go in and work in policy, they work in government, they work in related industries. Now, obviously, that could be changing given all that's going on with the federal government right now. But based on the data we have, those students end up doing pretty well. And Denison, another place that really in central Ohio, not far from the state capital, there's a big chip factory that's moving nearby. They really have the power of the state capital there, has done very, very well. Michigan State, another one. Most people, when they think of Michigan, I think they think of the University of Michigan. I also have North Carolina State on this because, again, I think when they think of North Carolina, they think the university, they think Carolina, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. NC State, these are accessible. All these places I'm mentioning, the other thing that puts them on this list is they're accessible, meaning they have an acceptance rate that is at least 20, 25%, but in many cases is 40, 50, 60, 70, even 80%. So they're accessible and they have these outcomes. They're excellent.
And I love how you put that, because we've talked about in the past, like the idea of something being accessible, affordable, and quality. It's usually you're only going to get 2 of those 3 with almost anything. If it's something accessible and good quality, it's probably not affordable, or it's affordable available, but the quality's not great. Like it's sometimes you have to sacrifice on one of those. So to look at this and say, hey, there's a good return on the investment when you mention what you're getting out of it versus what you put in and is accessible, like it starts to build that picture really well. I like how you're doing that with the mindset of how you look at schools again as an industry. I really think that's interesting. The way you laid it out is a lot better than what was in my head.
Any final thoughts, red flags that families should take into account, and anything that, advice you would give to the general public on higher education before we shut down the podcast here?
Again, going back to my first thought about this, is it is a product, you're buying it. I understand it changes lives. It's a place where you grow. It's a place where you're going to meet lifelong friends and partners. At the end of the day, it is also one of the biggest purchases you're going to make in life. So approach it like that.
Yeah.
Don't just approach it as this emotional good that you're buying.
Yeah, I would agree. Sound advice, sage wisdom from an expert in the industry for sure.
Absolutely.
Jeff, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It was a fantastic conversation. I think our listeners will appreciate, and hopefully they learned a little bit, and it wasn't coming from us this time.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you, and appreciate you having me on.
Awesome.
Yeah. Be on the lookout for the book, September
9th. They can buy it anywhere books are sold. So your local bookseller, anywhere. It comes out in hardcover, audio, as well as an ebook. So you can buy it in any form you want, all three forms if you really want. I'm recording the ebook or the audiobook, so you'll hear this voice, fortunately or unfortunately, if you buy the audiobook, but wherever books are sold, September 9th. And it's available now for pre-order as well.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Great stuff, Jeff. Appreciate it. Everybody, this has been College Knowledge.
See you again next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.